Hello again, everyone. I'm Sangeeta Watson, Senior Product Associate, Knowledge and Insights at EVPN, and I'm delighted to have you join us for the final session of Climate Week as part of EVPN's first ever South Asia Impact Festival. We're so glad that you have stayed on till now, and if you've just joined us, welcome. Before we jump into the session proper, some housekeeping rules. To download any session resources, please click on the download icon on the agenda page beside the session title. To continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates in the session, post the session, please make full use of the messaging function or the event feed in the platform. Finally, please note that this session will be recorded and you will be able to access the recordings for 3 weeks after the festival. And with that out of the way, for the final session, we will be talking about the e-mobility sector in India and how it is modernizing India's transportation system in a climate responsible way. And to kickstart this conversation, which is definitely a new subject area for me, I'm excited to introduce Mr. Francois Richard, Associate Director, Palladium Impact Capital, Mr. Cedri Tendong, CEO, Three Wheels United, and Mahua Acharya, CEO at Convergence Energy Services Limited. Without any further ado, over to you, Francois.
Thank you so much, Sangeeta, and it's a pleasure to be here and quite an honor to moderate this panel on electric mobility in India. It's a space that I'm very passionate about, having been living here for 2 years in Chennai, and can see some of the how the transportation system can be modernized in that way. And as you rightfully pointed out, it's an imperative to transform this transportation system in India to electrify it. One, because of the huge climate impact that this can have, especially here in India, where 70% of urban CO2 emissions are coming from the transportation sector, but also it's because of the health impact of that's associated with it. So it's easy to simply think about kind of electric mobility in the sense of the impact that it has on climate, but it's also climate change's real impacts on people's lives. So we need to remind ourselves of that. And I'm privileged to have this discussion with you here today with two phenomenal panelists who have been industry players in the space for many years. So first, as you introduced already, Sangeeta, Mahua Acharya, the lead of energy efficiency services new energy company Convergence, which focuses on energy solutions at the confluence of renewable energy and electric mobility. And then Cedri Tendong, the CEO of Three Wheels United, a tech and financier providing asset financing for light electric vehicle in India. But I'll let them tell you a little bit more about themselves and the work that they do in a little bit. Before moving on, I think actually, Mahua, I'll pass it on to you right now. But before moving on, it would be great if we could show the slides now. So if you could tell us, Mahua, a little bit more about Convergence and what it does and your views on the size of this market in India. To kick us off, that would be great.
Sure. Well, thank you, Francois, and thank you to all of you for inviting me to be at this panel. It's definitely one of the most dynamic industries that I have worked in, and I've only just started, but I've not seen this level of activity in a long time. Not when the carbon market first started and everybody was interested in doing something towards that market. So it's great that you're putting this event together. I've just been brought in to build out a new energy company that sits inside a government-owned entity. And this company called Convergence is looking to bring the EV sector closer to the power sector. And so think of it literally like at the convergence of that will be battery storage. And no matter which way you cut it, even if India were to achieve 30% of the electric mobility targets, the stress on the grid for simply charging is going to be overwhelming. there is already a lot of stress on the grid. There's a lot of solar already coming up. There is this blind spot of air conditioning where white goods are becoming cheaper, the planet is getting warmer, and people are just buying more ACs. And rural India and poorer places are also buying ACs. So with all of these things getting onto the grid, we will have to find slightly different business models of catering to people's energy needs. So it is my hope that in a few years from now, we will demonstrate decentralized energy solutions that cater to consumer needs like yours and mine, but that get away from this monolithic grid structure where as a consumer, I don't have much choice. So it's a very pro-choice kind of thinking, and it's definitely unprecedented. And electric mobility sits now, fairly central for all these reasons. Francois, you were asking, well, what's the state of the industry and how big is the EV financing opportunity? I stole this slide from RMI. I thought I'd referenced it, but this comes from a really good research report done by the Rocky Mountain Institute. And this tells you it's basically a $50 billion industry in India. On the right-hand side, I'm just going to move this thing where I see you all. That gray thing, that's the total out there. So, when we talk about EVs, it's not just, people just immediately think, well, I said outside of Cedric, who thinks three-wheelers, most of us think four-wheelers. But really the growth in a place like India for any kind of transportation is going to be first two-wheelers. So any EV growth, if you are really successful, has to replace that two-wheeler piece, because there's this big crowd of two-wheelers coming on stream, and they just constantly come, and two-wheelers are recession-proof. As we saw during the COVID period and job losses and so on, the only thing going up in sales were two-wheelers. That said, in terms of cost efficiency, why do buses make a bigger dent? Well, for one, of course, a bus costs more. But in terms of utilization, buses are, they're like top of the line in terms of utilization. So if you were to do the cost economics of EV, then you see that the bus category goes up a lot. The bus moves around about 100 kilometers a day. And if it is a commercial two-wheeler, yes, it does the same. But otherwise, two-wheelers that you and I use don't do 100 kilometers a day. Most certainly not. So the financing, the scale of financing of the EV market in India is about 50 billion. And this does not take into account all kinds of ancillary services that will service this industry. It certainly does not take into account at the core of convergence is battery storage that would service your car, and when it's not servicing your car and there's a bit of extra charge, will sell to the grid. That is a big market, and there's a big overlap. And there will be if we're successful, there will be a big overlap. We're already, I've been in this role for the last only 2.5 months, maybe 3 months, yes. And I've already working and have worked, it's all finalized, it's very much pilot, on a few charging stations that will be fully integrated, where the battery, when it's not charging your car, is charging the grid. It's stabilizing the little transformer at that point. It's the beginnings of demonstrating these decentralized charging stations, so that what happens then, if you do the economics of, hey, can I make money out of putting up charging stations? The answer is no. We don't have enough traffic. The costs are too high. The distribution companies still want to charge you a fair bit of money, naturally. So the answer is no. But most specifically, we don't have enough traffic. But if you were to then think of a charging station that comes with a lot of these other things, then the financing becomes very interesting. That battery that you put in suddenly starts serving so many other needs. It starts serving the grid's needs. It prevents the grid from having to incur capital expenditure and delay future investment, because your battery is now able to provide the headroom that it did not have. So the opportunities around financing are not just limited to this. The minute you start thinking about an EV company saying, hey, I'm also going to provide some power, or a power company saying, you know, I'm going to get into the EV space, it's very logical. So it's a lot bigger.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And that's super interesting because you touched on a couple of different points there. One, kind of what is the catalyst through which a lot of the change will come. So, you know, the size of the two-wheeler market to start with, and as well as the depth of the impact of certain segments also on the dent, and then the charging infrastructure and how that can be improved through the kind of these battery charging station models. So super interesting. Thank you all for that, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. But I want to introduce also, or I should say, turn to Cedric for him to tell us a little bit more, as you prompted, on the light vehicle side. And also kind of what are your views on the system around the light electric vehicle, and what are the key roles that need to be taken up in order for the system to work?
Thank you very much, Francois. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with you and Mahua. Thank you to the entire team for inviting us and all of the people listening to us. So I think Mahua hit on a few points which are very critical to the EV, also the EV story India would have and the world would have. The whole market around transportation is really largely focused on light vehicles, and this is the space where Three Wheels United plays in. Light vehicles do cause most of the pollution in the transport space, as well as have the highest number of sales. And if you look at what how the Indian government is approaching the transition to EV, they've clearly targeted this segment through different, whether it's the taxes, the FAME schemes, etc. This is a space Three Wheels has been playing for quite a while. So early in 2010, we designed one of the first hybrid tuk-tuks. But fast forward to that, we identified that the majority of players in this space really don't have the tools that enable them to become an owner of light EV, and this is purely financing, because over 90% of this market works through financing. The traditional banks will not finance these vehicles, or either some of them are not bankable, and that's where Three Wheels comes to play. But yeah, so we were set up with this goal to facilitate the ownership of light electric vehicles, and with as I'll say, a bigger impact mission, which is really to clean our air. The picture in front of you, I stole it from the CNN, depicting India just before
all these picture team.
Yes, I do agree, Mama. Showing India before the lockdown and after the lockdown. Of course, this is Delhi, and a lot of the pollution comes from burning farms. But it just goes to say that once you do a few things and change the way we live, we can breathe some clean air. So I'll just go to the next slide and talk about really the players who are in this ecosystem and how do you make it, or how do we make it work, right? So I think the key players here, you have your asset, well, the people who are manufacturing the vehicles. They have a responsibility to make a vehicle that is reliable and affordable. Then that vehicle has to run on some electricity or a battery. And Mawa is doing a lot of work around there, but then there is still lots and lots to be done. There are all sorts of vehicles, whether it's vehicle charging or battery swapping, that already exist in the market today. And then you have, well, these vehicles typically are generating revenue in some way or form. The aggregators play a big part there, and the government is also playing a part in terms of policies, facilitating registrations of these vehicles, subsidies to drive uptake, etc., etc. And then there is the drivers, the people who have to make the choice to buy. So what Three Wheels is doing is coming in and fitting in the missing piece of the puzzle, which is the financing. So we create a vast array of products ranging from loans to lease products to rentals, which allows a driver who typically would not own a vehicle, one, to have access to, well, to owning that vehicle. But we do beyond just that. What we believe that it needs all of the players to be integrated to make this work because of the nascent stage of the market, because of the nascent stage of the technology, because of the, I'd say, early and growing stage of the infrastructure. Because of all of these things I've named, and also the fact that there isn't any secondary market, your driver who at the end of the day has to make the choice to buy is very skeptical, right? So the only way you convince that driver is that you have all of the different players working together in a seamless manner to make the end product work for that driver. So this is what Three Wheels has done and is doing very well. So we, through our platform, we get data from the assets to maybe inform the manufacturer when the vehicle is broken, and also to see the performance of that vehicle and inform other drivers about how that vehicle will perform in future. We indicate to them where their charging points, and as much as more charging points come in, or swapping points, whatever that may be, right? And we that through our mobile app. We partner with aggregators to make sure that drivers are not just dependent on the revenues they can get themselves, but also can get some guaranteed income from these aggregators. And of course, we work with the government to facilitate registration and operation of these vehicles. So all in all, we are there to make the life simple for people who want to get electric vehicles and people who want to get light electric vehicles, because we believe that is how we transition to clean air. So I'll just stop there and then let you take on.
Mute myself. No, thank you, Cedric. And I think this point on building the system and making sure that all those pieces work together also related to some of the points that kind of Mawa was making before, especially with regards to kind of connecting the grid, as well as, so it's not just the electric vehicle itself, it comes in a whole package. But speaking of that, kind of on the battery point specifically, where do we stand on a technology front for the batteries? Is this a limitation still compared to some of those other traditional vehicles, or has the technology progressed enough that it's now kind of on the same on par with more traditional combustion types of vehicle? And maybe Mawa, since you started to talk about the battery swapping, I'll turn that one to you, and Cedric then more specifically for the three-wheeler segment.
Sure. Battery technology is moving really rapidly. The costs are also coming down, but the chemistry is also changing. So the technology itself is changing, the efficiency is changing, the durability is changing, and so the cost. Now, as an investor, you could always take the view that let me wait till the costs come down and let me then decide whether I want to put my money in, because the curve is on the downward. Now, either you get in and you push the curve down. Commercial investment will not want to go in that direction. So there is space for non-commercial investment to try and see if that curve can be bent faster, because we don't have the time to wait for the industry to do its thing before demand enough is created. Now, that said, despite a really rapidly moving space, the battery technology is nowhere near standardized either. And it would be nice if it was standardized, because costs would come down further. But yes, battery technologies are nowhere near. I would be quite absolutist in saying nowhere near. And I've tried now all of the four-wheeler cars that are in the Indian market. I was my family was one of the earliest adopters of an electric vehicle in India over 20 years ago. And batteries have come a very long way. But no, that's the biggest moving part out there.
And Cedric, maybe just before you touch on that point, I want to pick up on something you said, Mawa, on the room for more kind of philanthropic or kind of purpose-driven capital. And is there not also a room for the regulator to provide incentives to kind of help de-risk some of those investments for more commercial types of capital that might be interested but are waiting for the curve to come down? And I know there's some push like that that's already happening in the market, but is it enough? Is it working? Is it bringing in new money?
It's too early to tell, Francois. It's bringing in the excitement for sure. So, like I was saying, I was on some other panel recently, and I think as I was asked, never underestimate the size or the gravity of a policy signal or an announcement from regulators or serious announcement. Never underestimate that. A lot of people criticize that, saying these are only announcements. So if I'd start there saying, you know what, it's created a lot of interest, a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm, and for all the right reasons as well. Pro-market, want to get a better air quality out there, want to reduce pollution and noise and all sorts of things. Has it brought in more investment? It's too early. But there are in India, there are just so many players in electric mobility. So the brief answer would be yes, of course it has. But when you have a baseline of pretty much nothing, then the next one seems like an awful lot. But in comparison to what's on the road today, there's a long way to go. But I'm very optimistic for all. There's enough data to be optimism. It's not just my own big-headedness, but it's all moving in the right direction.
Yeah, it's great to stay optimistic always. Cedric, how about you from your perspective and the three-wheelers that you help finance? What is the condition of from the technology standpoint?
Yeah, so like Mawa's mentioned, right? So there is a lot changing in the market, and especially on how these vehicles are going to be charged on their battery, and considering that the prices of batteries are going down because of the changes in technology, and which Mawa's earlier mentioned as well. So I think for a traditional financier, that becomes a sort of a typical risk. But again, we're very far. While there are a lot of players in here, we're very far from the finish line. Three Wheels is one of those players which is really ahead of the curve and has a large fleet of vehicles operating on ground with real data and experiences from drivers. My take is that the technology is going to keep evolving because that's how every technology works. The prices are going to keep changing, but what is really required in the market today is a demonstration at large scale, right? So what we are looking at, for example, we believe that, okay, having a fleet of 10,000 vehicles on the road with a mix of battery swapping and charging would demonstrate the information that we're sort of thinking around, that the asset would go from charging at home because it's the most available option into battery swapping because it's the most economical option, right? With an intermediate part of it, peer-to-peer charging or charging by roadsides like you largely see with the e-rickshaws in Delhi. So our take is that the strength is in demonstrating it, right? Once you can show to people that the technology is working, people will only learn to appreciate the innovation that's coming in and the price changes. But yeah, that's really my take on the market there.
And so just to kind of bring the same perspective that Mawa made, the connection with the types of capital to demonstrate that scale, what do you think is most needed right now in terms of types of capital? to scale this?
Yeah, so I definitely think that there is space for philanthropic capital to play a role because it's a nascent market.
He did warn us that this might happen. I think we might have lost Cedric. Well, okay, in the interest of time while he comes back on, I think, part of the question around the ability to bring in philanthropic capital is also how that philanthropic capital is deployed, right? So it can be in a way that's, catalytic in bringing on other people on board, and not just, investing by themselves. So if for example, a philanthropic investor is willing to come in and provide first loss or subordinated in a debt structure, that might be ways to also bring on board additional capital to the space. Very quickly, I wanted to give an anecdote too with regards to kind of other ways that are not kind of private sector capital driven, but there are private and public partnerships out there that are promoting this, right? And I mentioned I lived in Chennai, and every day here I see now electric three-wheelers that are picking up trash, and that was done in partnership with between the city of Chennai and the Urban STEM, I think is the name of the company. But that's just another example that we can use resources to test new models and to kind of to demonstrate that there is, that this is a good investment for the future. But I'll pause there. I'm mindful that we are approaching the end, I believe. And so want to check with the AVPN team to see if we have any questions coming from the audience. Okay, I'm seeing one question. Mawa, to the extent that you have a view on also the sector more broadly outside of India, is the rest of the South Asia region experiencing the same kind of challenges or more challenges in scaling up electric mobility? So like in other countries like Bangladesh and so on?
Sure. So some of the other Asian countries, by virtue of them being smaller, have taken a more top-down kind of approach. Like Vietnam says, Laos says, Cambodia, I'm going to wipe out all two-wheelers on the road by a certain time. There are, by virtue of the size of the economy, there are only a handful of operators, maybe even less. So then when you talk about a phase-out plan, or scale-up is basically a phase-out of just like 2 or 3 companies you deal with. In Laos, it's only one company. Thailand is picking up. The regulations for EVs are, I mean, there's no obstacle, let me put it that way. The obstacles are not regulatory obstacles, if any, quote unquote obstacles. There's the usual problem of my EV costs a little bit more than, or significantly more than the combustion engine. And so Thailand has enabled swapping for a while. And there's one company that I know is doing very well in Bangkok. They are using swapping infrastructure and putting up swapping points to enable people to make the transition. And when you do that, when you separate the battery from the vehicle, the costs come down significantly. Swapping, that said, swapping is not I don't believe swapping is an answer. It's an intermediate problem. You and I are not going to stop to swap out my bike, certainly not in hot, sweaty Bangkok. But that's just what we have for now. Not until what we really need to scale up is so many things. Super fast charging. I shouldn't have to wait for 2 hours in a fast charger situation to tank up my car, to juice it up. So, what are the other countries doing? Indonesia has not made the move yet. Some of their fleets in Jakarta have converted. These are private operators, and they convert because their dynamics are a little bit different, in the sense that operating expenditure is much more of a key management parameter to monitor than the vehicle itself, because it's a taxi company. I really don't know about Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan. I don't believe there's that much because I've not come across any. But I'm aware of these Southeast Asian economies have done it a little bit differently.
Thanks, and I see we have Cedric again, and we lost you right when you were about to start answering the question with regards to the kind of types of capital and so on.
Yeah, apologies for dropping off. The joys of living in India. Well, I was talking about definitely there is a need for philanthropic capital, but also I think affordable debt is the next big one for driving down the cost of the end cost to the guy who owns the vehicle. And given that the market is 90% driven by financing, there's a role for cheap debt to come in, and of course DFIs and other say philanthropic type debts, which are much more cheaper, is very welcome to I'd say, to accelerate the growth in this area.
And since you brought up DFIs and philanthropic investors and so on, maybe a final question for you both is, what are you seeing as the most important impact metrics that are realistic for us to use to report on progress for those investors, right? Because if they're providing these type of catalytic investment, they in return would expect some evidence that this is demonstrating impact. So kind of what are some of the industry standards in terms of impact reporting?
Well, I'll jump into this question. So for us, it's very simple. It's in principle, we're replacing polluting vehicles off the road, right? So it's a matter of how many vehicles you're replacing and what type of vehicles you're replacing, and that would result into the impact would be directly on the pollutions you're averting. But additionally, the people who are operating these vehicles, we are creating a livelihood for them, right? So there is that double impact for creating wealth for people who would be living hand to mouth or in any other circumstance, not even be bankable. So I think there are multiple impact metrics that could come out of this. But the two that are very clear is just livelihood for the drivers themselves, since we're talking here about light vehicles, which are mostly used for generating revenues towards their families, and pollution that is averted. That's our case.
What about from your side, Mawak, and what are some of the key metrics that you're keeping track of?
The only thing I keep track of, Francois, is how many electric vehicles are on the road. I don't want to complicate the system right now with a whole lot of metrics. And I say that because really just increase the number of electric vehicles, and that's a proxy for so many things. So many things. We can slice and dice that proxy when we reach critical mass. So that's really, and I'm not being funny, it's just that's the only thing I keep track of. How many two-wheelers, how many four-wheelers, how many buses out there, when do the batteries from these buses expire, and when can they be released and made available for so many other things that they still have a life for. And all of this is just in an effort to reach critical mass. And I'm being extraordinarily patient with, it's really not my character, with so many of these companies, because I know that the battery industry is going through changes. They're under pressure. The Indian government has demand aspirations that are, for the first time in a market, that I'm seeing that the government is probably ahead of the industry and ahead of the market. So really the only thing I monitor is how many cars do we have out there.
All right, and so maybe that's the call to action for everyone that's listening. Let's drive up those numbers, and wherever you're playing in this ecosystem that Cedric was presenting before. You know, all these pieces need to work together to increase those numbers. So unless there's any final question from the audience, I think that's it from our end. And so I want to thank Mawa and Cedric for taking the time, and obviously the AVPN for setting up this session, and all the sessions really that have been taking place throughout the month for this for how to catalyze impact capital in South Asia across the 4 different verticals.
Thank you so much, Francois, Cedric, and Mahua, for this very illuminating and I trust convincing conversation. The next time I'm in India, I look forward to seeing more electric vehicles on the road, definitely. So we have now come to the end of the final session of the Climate Week at AVPN South Asia Impact Capital Festival. All the sessions over the last few weeks have been made possible with the kind support of our festival partners, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Sesame Workshop India, the Rockefeller Foundation, #COVID Action Collab, BNV Advisory Services LLP, the British Asian Trust, WPP India CSR Foundation, Catalyst Management Services Private Limited, and SATBA. To continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates in this session, please make full use of the messaging and meeting functions on our festival platform, and do share your highlights from this session on social media, and remember to tag us using the hashtag AVPN South Asia 2021 and hashtag social impact. Please join us for the final week of the South Asia Impact Capital Festival next week on 23rd February. The sessions will spotlight education, and we will begin our education week at 4 p.m. India Standard Time on the 23rd of February, and hope to see you all there as well. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Singit. Thanks, Francois.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
Cedric.
Thanks, Francois. Thank you, Mahon. Bye-bye.
Bye.